PowerSonic, and I don't even know if Tony knows a little bit of the history.
I do know a bit. It goes back a bit, actually.
It goes back quite a long time. We, radio parts, we used to, like most of the guys supplying the security industry, would bring in our own SLA batteries that we would manufacture in China. It was very much a commodity industry, and at some point in time, we decided, probably a good, around the time I started, around 15 years ago, we decided it was necessary to inspect and visit all of our factories. And I can say to date, every product that we import, we inspect our batteries. In the case of SLA batteries, it probably wasn't such a pretty case. In China, SLA batteries, while they're environmentally fine, as long as they're all being recycled, some of the stuff that happens in China is probably less than desirable. So we stopped dealing with the batteries, and we looked for a global name. And PowerSonic struck a very nice balance between the quality and also the desire to do the right thing by people and by the environment. And the rest has been history, been a fantastic product and amazingly low return rates. So very happy. And I'll pass you across to Tony. He's a BDM for PowerSonic in Victoria.
Yep. Okay. Look, as you said, I'm from a supplier of Seal Performance batteries, and we supply PowerSonic to Radio Parts Group. I've been in batteries for 15 years. I've started off with a company called Master Instruments. So that would have been, 15 years ago, and I moved to another company called M&H Power Systems, which became M-Power. So I work with power conversion systems and solar there. And now for the last 18 months, or just shy of 2 years, I've been with Seal Performance Batteries. Initially, I was going to come and talk purely about lithium batteries, but considering the audience and whatnot, I thought it might be a bit more appropriate to firstly touch on lead acid and see how we've evolved to lithium from that point. So, without further ado, we'll start with lead acid and the basic structure of that. What we've got here is a standard lead acid battery. Now we're going to use a 12 volt structured lead acid battery just because we're all very familiar with a nominal 12 volt application. What happened there? You can all see it? Yeah. Good enough for me. Okay, so what we've got here is positive and negative oxidized plates, lead plates, of which we have 6. Each plate, nominal voltage that you'll probably be familiar with is 2 volt, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times 2 volt lead plates. We've got 12 volt nominal. It's not to say that the battery is 12 volt, but when we say nominal, we're referring to the minimum voltage or the ideal voltage, well, not ideal, but the minimum voltage we want to be at, the average, the median. Typically, 12 volt battery when fully charged is going to be, once it's rolled off and taken off the charger, it's going to be at about open circuit voltage of 12.8 volts. But look, that said, there's an amount of usable power that we can get from a 12 volt battery, starting at about 12.8, and typically the functionality of a lot of devices sort of cuts out somewhere between, say, 10.8 to 11.5 volts. But for the sake of the argument, I'm going to use this 12 volt structure here as my point of reference. So, as you said before, the lead acid batteries that we've been supplying Radio Parts Group is PowerSonic. Now, you may or may not be familiar with the brand, but just so that we're all on the same page, here's one I prepared earlier. And when it comes to lead acid batteries, there's different variations on the theme. It's an oils ain't oils kind of application when it comes to lead acid batteries. So, firstly, what I'd like to do is roll through the 2 different types of lead acid batteries, or 2 different types of applications for lead acid batteries, more so when it comes to PowerSonic, or when it comes to sealed lead acid batteries, which is what we're referring to today more specifically. We're all familiar with car batteries, flooded batteries, which are now maintenance free, but for the most part they're flooded batteries. They're not fully sealed and they are spillable, and they're technically classed as dangerous goods. What I'd like to refer to today when I'm talking about lead acid batteries is purely sealed lead acid batteries, SLA, or VRLA that you might have seen, which is valve regulated lead acid. I'll just go through it quite simply here. So as I said before, we've got 6 sets of plates. We've got separators which isolate each plate. The reaction between the two combined with a combination of water and sulfuric acid. The ratio is 1/3 sulfuric acid typically and 2/3 water. The two of those combined creates what we, the two of those, when we combine them is what we call electrolyte. And as we're referring to here, that fills up these cavities. So at the top of the battery, you've got your terminals, positive and negative respectively, because at one end, anode and cathode, positive and negative. We've got these bus bars that line them all up, and as I said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 volts, and we've got a cap over the top. When we talk about valve regulated, when these batteries are overcharging or sulfating, or there's, you know, a bit of, you know, chemical activity going on in there, typically they'll gas. But with sealed lead acid batteries, well, they'll gas, there are safety valves at the top to release it in the event that there is a pressure build-up. For the most part, they hold their own, and I've seen these things being overcharged and blow out like almost like a balloon. You know, you could almost roll a 100 ampere hour battery down the street. But look, I won't go too much into that. It's a pretty basic structure. We've all seen them on the shelf, and yeah, I'm going to use 12 volts as a point of reference with this, but we've all seen 6-volt batteries for emergency lights and exit and whatnot, and in the event of that, 1, 2, 3, 2 volts a pop, nominal, there's your 6 volts. And that's your basic structure of a lead acid battery. Now, I want to touch on two different types of lead acid battery. Sealed lead acid battery, by the way. AGM, absorbed glass mat. Secondly, gelled electrolyte or gel batteries. The structure of these batteries and the way that they're laid out, you know, internally is very, very similar. The difference between the two is more so based on the electrolyte or the combination of water and acid. Now, another two things to be considered when we're talking about batteries is application. This is the bottom line when it comes to sorting the right battery for the right job, application. The two types of applications or the means of use that I'm going to refer to as a point of reference here is going to be standby or cycling. Standby, when we talk about standby batteries, these are batteries that are floating the majority of their life. Whilst all of these batteries are rechargeable, you know, you can drain the power out of them, charge them back up. Some will do it better than others. The ones that won't do it as good as the other are more for standby applications, because for the most part, 90% of their life, they're floating. They've got a constant voltage attached to them, and they're only called upon in the event of a mains fail or in the event of a power failure. Like what we've got up here, for example. Inside this emergency light here is a battery, most likely a lead acid, but they're moving to lithium, which I'll get to later. In the event of a mains fail, there's a battery inside of there, and the law states with emergency lights that they have to hold themselves up for 2 hours. Because if we've got a fire or something, by law, you've got to give 2 hours worth of good grace for everybody to get out of Dodge. So that there is a typical backup application, or network power as it's called. UPSs are the same, and don't underestimate backup applications. I would say that floating or network power applications, as they're also called, would represent, I'd say, other than say automotive, the majority of, you know, usage in industry. You've got to remember every single power station, every single substation, every single telco, every single office, anything that's got a server. These data centres that you're starting to see go up everywhere, so all of them are using some form of stored energy or kinetic energy with generators. It is a massive, massive market and a massive application. That's what I refer to as standby, or network power as I put it. The second one is cyclic. Cyclic applications we're starting to see a lot more of now with electric cars, but also take into account electric wheelchairs, everything from boom gates to level crossings, something where the power is being drained from the battery and recharged and drained and recharged and so on and so forth. A cyclic application is one that consumes power, that's replaced and consumes it again, and then it's replaced, etc., etc. So you can see when it comes to a standby application, you really don't need that great a specification to cater to it to be able to cycle numerous times. Because for the most part, hopefully, ideally, it'll never get drained, but it's there as a safety measure. Look, I'll go through two of the differences between the batteries. Look, I'll summarise this and try to make it a bit more simply. When it comes to AGM batteries, by the way, they look exactly the same, almost. The difference between the two here in terms of the casing is purely the colour. In terms of the structure of the plates and how it's all put together internally, it's much the same. The main difference, as I said, is the silica within. With Agm batteries, it's purely water and sulfuric acid combination. When it comes to gel, they add a silica, they add like a silicon, like a sand based to the mix of the electrolyte is what I was referring to before. The electrolyte between the two, the electrolyte in the AGMs, as I said, is water and acid. When they add silica to the electrolyte for gel batteries, it forms a paste. It means that the electrons are absorbed slower into the plates, whereas they're a lot faster and a lot less resistance in Agm batteries. Now, as a rule of thumb, and there are variations on this theme, Agm batteries are more appropriate for standby applications. Gel electrolyte batteries are more appropriate for cyclic applications. And that's the main difference between the two. However, with different purities of lead, different strengths of acid, look, Agm batteries in cyclic applications are very, very popular. Why? Because they're cheaper. The vast majority of the batteries on the planet, over 80%, as it says down there, on the planet are Agm batteries. It's cheaper to manufacture, the volume is massive, the unit price is low. And that's why you'll see, for the most part, in caravans, cyclic Agm batteries. Once upon a time, gel batteries, because the cyclic capabilities are more favourable, were the in thing to do in caravans, but when people started to weigh it up, the marginally better performance, well, 20%, you're paying 25, 30% more for the batteries. Gel batteries were great, but more popular with industrial applications or high-end applications where they really need the cyclic benefit. Agm batteries in cyclic for the caravan industry, which is a huge one. Look, it's a recreation industry. The demand isn't so severe. But look, between the two, there are some differences. And when I talk about the cyclic capabilities being better from one over the other, this is what I'm referring to. Okay, what I've done here is a comparison between an Agm, a cyclic Agm, so the plates are manufactured and the grade of acid is manufactured to benefit cyclic applications better, versus gelled electrolyte. Now, as I said before, we're talking about number of cycles. What's more favourable? What's going to get you the better mileage in terms of how far you drain it versus how many times you can cycle it through? So look, let's start with an Agm Cycling, which weapon of choice for most recreational applications. We'll see them in all caravans, and then we'll go to gel. So there's two factors to be considered. This is a golden ratio when it comes to cyclic applications in batteries and how many times they can be used, right? I'm going to focus on the cyclic element because we're going to move to lithium, which for the most part is very much specific to cyclic applications at the moment. So, without further ado, Agm. So, take into account depth of discharge. How far do we really want to drain a battery? Now, when it comes to lead acid batteries, the most you'd ever really want to, in my experience, drain them is about 50% depth of discharge. That means 50% of the available power taken out of the battery. Once you get below that, it brings into question the longevity of the battery. So I don't want to elaborate too much, I'll keep it simple. At 50% depth of discharge on an Agm battery, our number of cycles is somewhere between, we'll say, 50%. It's a pity they don't use increments of 10, but we'll say somewhere between the two. An Agm will say, at 50%, we'll say roughly 625 to 700 cycles. It's not too bad. We'll say 50% depth of discharge. By the way, fully charged open circuit voltage will be at about 12.8. Once you've gone to about 12 volts, you've pretty much used up all available efficient capacity left in the battery. So at 800 cycles, not too bad. But let's have a look at a direct comparison with that and gelled electrolyte. At 50% depth of discharge, thankfully they've actually listed it, I don't have to pick a gap between the two. We're at about 1200 cycles. It's a hell of a lot more favourable. Agm batteries, purely for the price, are the weapon of choice for the recreation industry. If you really wanted, as far as lead acid is concerned, better performance out of a battery, you'd go for gelled electrolyte, hands down. And look, gelled electrolyte's got other advantages as well. Because it's got silica in it, as opposed to just having a combination of water and acid in the electrolyte, it's less susceptible to vibration. People that have got caravans and whatnot, I'd always say, well, okay, and if you're really serious about it, you're going to be doing it a hell of a lot. You want the battery to withstand, for a good period of time. You're better off getting a gel because of all the bouncing on the road and everything like that. It holds a lot more solidly. There's not so much movement inside it because it's not a thin combination of, water and acid. If I drill up these two batteries here, by the way, I don't have any gels here, unfortunately, but these two here are Agm batteries, this one and this one. Different sizes, of course. If I drill a hole in the side of this, I'm going to get leaking fluid, water and acid combination. If this one was a gel, for argument's sake, and I drill a hole in it, nothing's going to come out because it's like a white paste, and it gets pastier as it gets cycled through more. Initially it's a bit of a clear when it's brand new, but when it gets cycled through, the silica combines with the combination of acid and water and it goes into a paste. And it's a hell of a lot more safer in the event of, heaven forbid, a crash or a puncture or something like that. It's not to say that the AGM is going to be that bad, but you know what, I've seen these things get cracks and whatnot and burn through carpet and all sorts of things after time. So it's horses for courses. But look, two things to be considered with batteries is application, standby or cyclic. I've had a lot of people over the years, and I'll give you a classic example. See this size here, this is an 18 ampere hour battery. And look, I started out my sales career, but I used to work in the 90s in J-Car. And you get somebody coming, I need one of these. And at the time I never thought about it. What's the application? What's it being used in? Well, it's getting used in a golf cart. Well, if it was going to be used in a golf cart, you'd probably be better off going for a gelled electrolyte, because you're going to get a hell of a lot more cycles and more bang for buck, and you don't want to get stuck on the 16th hole. But it's for a UPS. Well, that's a no-brainer. We'll stick with a standard AGM or something. Or it's for a kid's toy, or something that it's not exactly a critical application. Cheaper, it'll still cycle through. And I'll tell you what, if that kid gets 800 cycles out of it and kills it and hasn't grown out of it by then, you've done pretty damn good. So, moving right along. Now, I want to keep this a bit more simplified, so I don't want to go into too much rhetoric. But a comparison between the two batteries, gel and AGM. Yep.
Sorry. Throw in the factor of high current drain, such as starting mode.
Okay. Are you talking about a starting application, like a cold cranking application?
Yeah.
Okay. There are benefits to AGM batteries over gels, and that is this. Lower internal resistance on AGM batteries. That means that you can drag a whopping amount of power out of them in a spike, in a hit, more so than gel. Gel's got a higher resistance. But it absorbs power a lot. Like it's like a marathon runner. A gel battery will draw power, evenly over a longer period of time better, more efficiently, right? It'll cycle a hell of a lot better like that because it's not getting thrashed around so much. You can't drag as much current out. An AGM battery has a very similar charge profile or power profile to that of an automotive battery. With an automotive battery, it's based on CCA, cold cranking amps. How many amps can you drag out of it in a hit? Because all we want to do is kick over the starter motor and we're off and running. With AGM batteries, the reason that they're very popular for UPSs and stuff like that is in the event of a mains fail and we need power and we need it quick and we need a hell of a lot of it with as minimal internal resistance as possible, there's your weapon of choice. Just because it won't cycle so good doesn't mean it doesn't have its benefits in other areas. See, the thing is, with gel, people say, okay, cyclic applications, money and everything like that. Well, okay. For the most part, gel, as I said, was a flavour of the month for the recreational market, but where it has always been a constant fixture has been in motive power applications, something where there's money riding on it or there's a critical application riding on it. Think about people in wheelchairs. This is an example I want to use as well in terms of charge rates, or selecting right charges for batteries when it comes to lead acid. The difference between the two is, right, I want to use a wheelchair for an example. This is a kind of application where you want to get the most out of the battery because someone's life is depending on it, or their quality of life, okay? So it's horses for courses, but I'll use this as an example. All wheelchairs, whether they be the pensioner scooters or whether they be pride wheelchairs or, All of them are spec'd with gelled electrolyte batteries for the obvious reasons I touched on before. Now, because they're spec'd for that, the charges that they come with are set for gelled electrolyte. And what's the difference between the two? Well, here it is. Absorbed glass mat. And this is, I won't go too much into the physics of it. I'll keep it simple without sounding too damn stupid. But our charge voltage is higher. In terms of the boost voltage, you know that when it's flat, you want to hit it with a higher voltage, and then as it starts to consume, draws less power, then we can roll off to what's called float, typically 13.8 volts that you all might have seen on chargers over the years. 14.8 volts, or 14.7 to 14.8, for my money, is your recommended boost voltage to bring up an absorbed glass mat battery. With gel, it's a bit gentler, only marginally, 14.4 to 14.6, or volts per cell. What is it, 2.45 is typically what we've got here. 2.4 is gel. It doesn't seem like much, but here's the interesting thing. Going back to wheelchairs, a lot of people, and I've seen this time and time again, and it's a bit of a worry, but a lot of people just want to save money and they want to go for the cheapest option, and typically people with a disability don't exactly have money to burn. So more often than not, when I see a problem with cyclic Agm batteries in, say, 40 ampere hour, is because they went for the cheaper option. That's all very well and good, and for the most part it will do the job. But take into account this, to bring up or effectively, efficiently charge an Agm battery, you've got to have a higher voltage. But the wheelchair that it came with, the charger, is only spec'd for gelled electrolyte. Now, immediately this won't be an issue, but over time, that Agm battery is never getting the full charge, or it's never being effectively charged. You're only bringing it up to about 90%, and then it's being drained, and 90% and being drained. And because it's never been fully charged, sulfation starts to occur. There's degradation in the lead plates over time. It's not to say that it's going to kill the battery, but it's going to bring into question the longevity of the battery, which, you know, if you're in a wheelchair or something like that, is a problem. Golf. I mean, anybody here play golf? Anybody? Hands? Yeah. How many of you have got the electric carts? None of yous? That's a good thing. It means you're healthy for now. But trust me, in a few years, there's going to be a couple of yous that'll have them. And I'm forever hearing about golfers saying, oh, I bought this battery and oh, the last one lasted me, the Sonnenschein, the gel Sonnenschein, oh, that lasted me 3 years. This one barely got me 18 months. It's like, yeah, because you were a cheapskate and you went for an Agm and your charger's not spec right for it. And what's more, your golf game's probably pretty crap over that time. You've been shanking it a lot and you've been doing a lot more zigzagging and covering a lot more real estate. You know what I mean? Like, it's horses for courses. But look, I won't touch too much on it, but look, there's some of the basic differences there. Gelled electrolyte versus absorbed glass mat. Hey, look, there still are some really good cyclic absorbed glass mat batteries, and they're starting to use these as start batteries in vehicles now. One of the problems that lead acid batteries have is temperature. They're starting to overcome that now. When your temperature gets up over, I think it's 30 degrees Celsius, all batteries in terms of their performance are rated on an ambient temperature of 20 degrees. When it gets up over 30 degrees Celsius, the efficiency starts to die off terribly. And when it comes to under the hood of a car, that's why initially it was flooded batteries, because when the temperature's high, they gas and it needs to be released. Look, I don't know how they're doing it, but they're managing to put AGMs under the hoods of cars now. And they're talking about bringing out lithiums for it. But for the money, I can't see it being a thing yet. Yep.
What basically is the cost difference between the two? We're talking 20%?
About 20%. 20%. Yeah, it's about 20%. But, you know, the cost is about 20%, but the performance, as you can see, well, used correctly, is nearly double. So, look, it works out in the end. When I talk about standby and cyclic applications, I'm going to go to lithium in a minute, but I want you to take into consideration this. Lithium, for the most part, 99% of applications is cyclic. And look, if I was to sort of look into the future, my theory is this. Eventually, you're not going to see gel anymore in terms of lead acid, because gel is, for the most part, a cyclic chemistry for lead acid. And lithium runs rings around it. For standby applications, that's all very well and good to stick with lead. because for the cost of lithium, it's more oriented to cycling because it performs a hell of a lot better. You're always going to see lead-acid batteries used in standby and network power. But for cycling, one day, you won't see gel anymore. That's just my theory. Because when the price of this comes down, and you reach that apex, you're not going to see gel anymore. But that said, I've seen gel used in standby applications, like, I'll give an example. Backup batteries for boom gates, level crossings, yeah? They're all flat plate gel. Oh God, why would you spend extra on gel? It's not really it's not a cyclic application because it only gets called on the event of a mains fail to have the battery there. Why? As I said before, it's less susceptible to temperature. Vibration, doo-dung, doo-dung, doo-dung. You get a train rolling past the whole time, and that's why. But I won't go too much more into this or else I'll lose the pattern of where we're heading next, which is, look, are we all familiar with wiring configuration, series and parallel? We've all heard of this concept before, yeah? I thought I'd touch on it briefly just so you can get an idea of some of the principles involved, because it'll make a bit more sense when I explain the functionality of lithium. So, in the event, what we've used here as an example is 6-volt batteries, 6 and 6, 2 in series. When we wire in series, we double our voltage. And when we wire in parallel, voltage remains at a constant, our capacity doubles. So, series, our capacity remains the same, voltage doubles. Once again, in parallel, our voltage remains at a constant, our capacity doubles. And then you've got this seemingly looking headache down the bottom here, which is a combination of the two. This is series parallel in that we've gone 6 volt, 6 volt, 6 volt, 6 volt, all 10 ampere hour. If you want to get your head around series parallel, which for me is second nature, but first thing you want to do is series. These two here, once they've been seriesed up, they become 12 volts at 10 amp. Once again, double the voltage, a constant capacity. Once again, down here. Once they've been seriesed up, consider them as one entity, 12 volt. And then once we've paralleled in this format, what goes from being 4 by 6 at 10 amps is 12 volts at 20 amps. We've doubled and doubled. It's pretty straightforward. When I was talking before about electric wheelchairs and electric DC motor drives, typically they all run on 24 volt. Right down to boom gates. Wheelchairs will always have 2 batteries wired in series. Yeah? You'll see people in caravans where that's a 12 volt system, they've got 2 batteries. Well, they're bringing in 2 batteries for higher capacity. In that instance, they're going to wire them in parallel. And there's some examples of the differences between the two. It ain't rocket science, but you know, I have seen some real nightmare wiring jobs when it comes to this. A good rule of thumb is when you're paralleling batteries, and look, okay, there's probably arguments against it. Just in my experience, you should never parallel more than 3 batteries, because once you get power factor errors in that your cabling between your batteries can vary by a few millimeters or a couple of centimeters or whatever, but once you incorporate more batteries in parallel, there's resistance issues between cabling and whatnot, and all of a sudden you get these unbalanced batteries. And you know, it's like a weak link in a chain. They're only going to perform as good as the weakest battery after a while. It's over time this will happen. But look, when it comes to paralleling, ideally, keep it at 2. Once you sort of go into 3, you're sort of asking for trouble. Now, moving right along, here we are at lithium. I'll try and keep this as simple as possible, but it's a very similar principle being used as what we had with lead acid. There's an anode and a cathode and a separator. You've got 2 materials of which cater to a positive and negative polarity, and then you've got an active ingredient. In the event of lithium, the active ingredient is lithium as opposed to electrolyte. And because of that, you don't have to have so much real estate available to cater to a combination of sulfuric acid and water. You've purely got some wafers there of 2 types of material, 2 minerals. And it uses up a hell of a lot less room. It requires a lot less material. It's a lot smaller and it's a lot lighter. There's 2 different formats. As with everything, there's arguments for and against. You've got cylindrical and you've got flat, or some call it pouch, or you can have polymer. But look, cylindrical, the principle is that they're wrapped in a cylinder, who would have guessed? And when it comes to flat, they're laid flat like a wafer, and the same principle applies. Essentially, look, arguments for or against, I'll give you one of each, and then before I lose any hair, I'll drop it there. But cylindricals, some people are in favour of them because they don't have any problem with expansion and stuff that you'll see with flats like polymer plates. But with cylindricals, because they're cylinders and you drop them all into a casing or something, because you've got little gaps in between them, it uses up a lot of room and a bit of real estate. One of the arguments for and against. Now, as I said before, I'm going to focus on cyclic applications with lithium in this instance, purely because they come into their own. I've got a few slides on here which I don't want to be too graphy and bore people, but I'll keep it simple, as I said. All right, comparison with lead acid. With lead acid, we've got plates which have a nominal voltage of 2. With lithium, 3.2. Now, as I said, with the nominal voltage with lead acid, it's 2, but it should be more like 2.3 to 2.45 volts when it's charged. With lithium, per one, it's 3.6, 3.7 volts. We've all seen the old motherboard batteries and everything like that, 3.6 volts. But nominally, 3.2. You know, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. There's your 12.8 volts when hooked up in series. And this is why I wanted to explain series parallel before, because there's only so much capacity you can get out of a cylinder or a wafer. So when lithium is loaded into an enclosure the likes of this, it's loaded in a series parallel configuration. Yeah? So, of course, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 in series to achieve that end voltage, but we've got to parallel up a whole bunch to achieve a capacity. Now, the issues with balancing and stuff like that are in terms of, you know, power factor errors and stuff like that I mentioned before is quite prominent here, which is why with every lithium block that you get, it will always have what's called a BMS, battery management system. The battery management system does a hell of a lot of things, but the most prominent thing it does for the functionality of the chemistry is balance out the cells so that everything receives an even charge, so that the power is consumed from each cell evenly. There's a whole bunch of other features on a BMS like protection against overvoltage, protection against being drained too low and it going open circuit. A whole bunch of safety features because yes, it is a volatile chemistry. Don't forget that. The original lithium when it first came out was a real problem. Lithium iron phosphate is a lot more stable than the conventional lithium when it first came out. It's a watered down version of this incredible lithium chemistry, but it's a lot less volatile, which is why you're going to see it everywhere in electric cars, domestic applications, what have you. Pardon me. A little bit dry. Okay, so I'll try to paraphrase if I may, but like I said, safe form of lithium ion, overcharging, discharging, short circuit protection as addressed by the BMS. High thermal runaway point, meaning it can handle heat and whatnot. Can be charged via most standard SLA chargers. Another thing in terms of the BMS. To charge these effectively, without any form of BMS, you'd need a specified lithium charger that addresses the voltage at 3.7 to boost it. There's no real float when it comes to lithium. Once it's charged, you disengage. But when we've got blocks like this, or commercially available lithium blocks, the BMS also regulates power. If we hook up a 12-volt charger to it, it's not like it can deliver it balanced across it. There's a hell of a lot more going on here than a bunch of bus bars and lead plates. It's got to be able to regulate the power to independently charge each 3.2 volt nominal block at 3.7 and regulate it and balance it across all of them. Because if they're all unbalanced after a while, you know what? Some of them are going to suffer, and you'll notice when your phone gets hot. I don't know whether this is true or not, but somebody says because one of your lithium cells is out, and it's creating heat. The better your BMS, the longer the performance of your battery is concerned. Some of the other issues are, well, slow capacity loss. This is another thing that it's got over lead acid. Sitting on the shelf, it won't self-discharge as long as lead acid. You can have a lithium on the shelf and 2 years later take it off, maybe give it a bit of a charge and it won't degrade. With lead acid, it's like a car battery. If you leave it there with not even a load connected to it, it'll self-discharge over time, and when it self-discharges to a point, the lead plates will sulfate, which means that the chemistry hasn't been stimulated enough over time, and you'll start to lose capacity. Not the problem with lithium. The high cycle life is something I'll come to soon, and look, it is cost effective. Here's the thing. What scares the hell out of people with lithium is they say, hey, how much for that battery? $1,500. I can buy a lead acid for $350. Why would I buy that? Well, here's why. The cycle life. With a lead acid, as you've seen, by comparison with that of AGM versus gel, it's not too bad, but I can tell you this. You're going to pay 4 to 5 times the price for a lithium, but your running life in terms of cycle life is going to be 7 to 8 times as long. The initial upfront investment, I mean, it treads water when you really look at it. It is viable in the long run, but trying to get people to open their wallets up front, therein lays the challenge. When you consider the long-term advantages, yes, it is more cost effective, but yes, it can be a hard sell. I do not deny that. When I can go to a four-wheel drive store, or I can go online and I can buy a lead acid battery for as little as $200, it can be a hard sell. But I think, yeah, well, okay. But in the time, you've gone through, 8 of these, and you could still have had one of these. And all the messing around and replacing and all this sort of business in between. Sure, you'll have some scrap lead, and you could probably buy a slab of beer after you've cashed in all those 8 bloody lead batteries. But hey, it's up to you. The long-term benefits outweigh the short-term shortcomings. Okay, here's another really, really major benefit that I've seen in a comparison between two, or that you'll see in comparison between the two. I don't know if any of you care to give it a crack, but wait, this is 100 ampere hour lead acid, this is 100 ampere hour lithium, 27.5 kilograms. I've seen them go up as high as 31 kilos, depending on the capacity of the battery, around about 100 to 105, that's 105, but I've seen 110s at about 31 kilos. But by comparison with that, in terms of lithium, we're less than half, which, when we're talking about motive power applications, power to weight ratio is a hell of a lot better, and you're consuming less power, so it's more efficient there anyway. I don't know if anybody wants to give it a crack, but here is a lithium and here is a lead acid. Does anybody, yourself, give it a crack? So yeah, it's quite considerable. You know what I'm saying? We're less than half the weight, and that certainly helps. Yeah.
Excuse me? Just on the lead acid, on the lithium batteries,
Yep.
all the electronics inside, it's obviously controlled by electronics.
Yes.
Efficiency, reliability, what about after a couple or 3 years, the electronics backs up?
You
don't have that on the lead acid battery, there's absolutely nothing in there.
That's right. It's purely bus plates. Look, when you're talking about the things that, in my experience with electronics, right, and we're going back a bit to my formal training, what gives up in electronics after a while is capacitors. More specifically, electrolytic capacitors. You're all familiar with your electrolytics? After a while, they degrade. In terms of what's used on the BMSs to control lithium, it's solid state silicon, it's FET transistors and whatnot. If you think in terms of the length of life on a standard silicon chip of that sort of nature, it's going to outlast the number of cycles that you get on the battery. You're going to at least get 7 years to 10 years out of it. And look, we give 3 years warranty on the battery. Well, within reason, depends on what you're using it for, but you've got to be aware, you can't buy a car, wrap it around a tree and claim warranty, so realistically. But look, your electronics will hold up longer than the chemistry in the battery, bottom line. The one thing that will give way in electronics is capacitors, of which there's none electrolytics used on any of the BMSs with lithium for the sake of longevity. And look, there's something really interesting that I'd like to show you that I think it's really important. Here it is. This is something that I only really got data on. This is about 6 months ago. I learned a hell of a lot about this, and it really blew my mind. and it's about capacity degradation. Now, we all know that, as I showed you in the graphs before, that depth of discharge, number of cycles, the deeper that you drain it down, will decrease the number of cycles that you can get out of it. But also what happens with lead acid is, the lower that you drain it down and bring it back up, the more times you bring it all the way down and bring it down lower, it degrades the capacity holding of the lead plates. In that, and here's an example, all right? What we've got here is we've got Agm and we've got gel batteries, but like lead acid for want of a better term. If we look at a median, I'll explain. So this is number of cycles, capacity, ampere hour. Now take into account, this is a lead acid. Now, admittedly, these batteries are being thrashed. They are being dragged down to 11.5 volts every time, with 20 amps being consumed from them. It's 20 amps draining it down to 11.5 and then being charged with 20 amps. And that's all that's going on here. 20 amps in, 20 amps out. Charge, discharge, charge, and over again, number of times. Now here's the interesting thing. Let's use 100 as a point of reference. This is 100 times it's been cycled. Yeah, and it's been dragged down to 11.5 volts. Now, this is the capacity that it's rated at after that amount of cycles. Yeah? If we take into account this point here, right, and we get to say 100 cycles, you realise that after 100 cycles being drained all the way down, now, you know what? Ideally, when you're draining a lead acid battery, the optimum, or the recommended depth of discharge is 30%. I used 50% as a point of reference before, but 30% and you'll do well. This is pretty much 100% depth of discharge, but 100 cycles, 100% depth of discharge, it's only like 35 ampere hour left in the battery. That's the capacity of the battery after 100 cycles, down to 100% depth of discharge. You see what's happening here? The degradation in the capacity, the holding capacity of the battery is absolutely smashed the deeper you go down. Ah, what's that at the top, you ask? That's lithium. Now, let's have a look at the comparison between lead acid and lithium in this instance. This is our 100 ampere hour lithium Sentry, by the way, yeah? We started, we call it the 100, but it's 105 ampere hour. Now, this is drained all the way down. This is 100% depth of discharge. And I can tell you, look, this is 400 cycles here, and we're still on 100 ampere hour from 105. This is a little bit old. We've just surpassed 500 cycles and we're at 97% capacity by comparison. Yeah? Really think about that. The target in terms of it, you know, considered to be holding its own is to hold 80% of its initial listed capacity down to 100% depth of discharge after 2,000 cycles. That's what we're aiming for, and we're on track to do that with how the testing is going at the moment. If I could extend this out till, I don't know, the Spencer Street and have this graph going to 2,000, we're on target to hit 80% at 2,000 cycles, which is pretty good when considering that, you know what, we're pretty much at 20% of initial capacity on the best lead acid you're going to get, you know, after 160 cycles. And look, to me, I was sort of shocked when I saw that after 15 years in batteries. I looked at that and I thought, my God, you know. But take into account, okay, it looks pretty savage, but that's 100% depth of discharge. Now, who's doing that with lead acid batteries? Well, okay, your grey nomads and their caravans and all that, yeah, they may well do that, but they'll be on powered sites, they'll charge it up, they've got the panels on the roof. But who does that? Well, I'll give you an example. Once again, people in wheelchairs. They will most certainly take a battery down well past 50% depth of discharge. And that is why, if you see a gelled electrolyte battery, whether it's a PowerSonic or whether it's MK or whatever, you'd be mad to put a warranty on it for anything more than a year. Because if you take into account, you know, if you're charging it every day, and let's say you've got somebody who's rather enthusiastic and they're going to take it down below 50% depth of discharge in 365 days, okay, it's going to look a bit more favourable. But you know what, if you warranty that thing, if you give 2 years, if somebody says, hey, here's a gelled electrolyte cyclic battery for motive applications, I'm going to give you 2 years warranty, chances are he's going to skip the country after 18 months or something. There's no way they'll get it. You'd be mad. You can't adhere to that. So, yeah, look, take that into account. You are getting what you pay for with lithium. Please.
The recommended charging range is 20% of the ampere hour capacity. Lead acid, what is it?
for the...
Yeah, okay. They say a maximum. With lead acid, you've heard about charge rates, 20% of C. Anybody here? Yep, 10%. Optimum amount of charge. They say maximum amount of charge there for a lead acid is about 20% of C. 100 ampere hour battery, 20 amps maximum. Ideally, 10 amps. And the charge is bloody cheaper too, trust me. Optimum is about 10 amps. With lithium, it's quite considerable. See this? This is a 20 ampere hour battery. Yeah? Now let's say we wanted to go for that 10% rule optimum charge, and it was a lead acid. What's that, 2 amps? Get a bit excited, give it 5, 4, whatever, yeah? Well, I can tell you now, this here will take, this is maximum continuous, is 20 amps. By comparison with a lead acid, with all the resistance issues that come with it, you can hit that with, at the most you probably want to give it 5 amps, and it won't chew it constantly. It might, and it'll back off. It'll start at 5 amps when it's thirsty, but after time it'll back off and slowly. I can tell you now with lithium, this is a real benefit of it. I can hook up a 20 amp, in this instance, I can hook up a 20 amp charger to it, and it will chew the full 20 amps flat stick until it's got about probably 10% left to go, and only then will it back off. So, it'll charge in a fraction of the time of lead acid. It's nowhere near as heavy, and the performance is incredible in terms of its efficiency. Interesting thing about lithium as well. With lead acid, we know that, oh look out, we're starting to drain power, or the power's coming out of the lead acid, or because the voltage gradually rolls down. Yeah, we're starting at 12.8, we hook up a load, 12.6, 12.5, 12.4, boom, boom, boom. We wind up, 11.5 volts. It's gradual. With lithium, it's not like that. It sustains the voltage for longer. Until you've got 77% left in the tank, it'll sustain the voltage above 12 volts. And it'll hold it there. And then it'll roll off sharply. Now, take this into account. And that's why 100 ampere hour lithium may be the equivalent of like 150 ampere hour in a lead acid. The efficiency of it. Think about this. If we've got a load, a lamp, a light, whatever, it's drawing watts, a combination of volts and amps combined, right? The two factors combined create watts. Now it's going to drag X amount of watts come hell or high water. So just because the volts are rolling down, it's got to compensate with that by dragging more amps out of it. When it comes to lithium, the voltage stays at such a constant and so stable that it has a balanced amount of consumption of amps, and it doesn't drag more amps out as the volts roll down. It doesn't have the resistance issues of lead acid. It's so much more efficient in that sense. Yep.
So I can throw a 20 amp charger on that battery,
Yep.
standard lead acid 20 amp charger, the battery management system will take care of it.
It will take care of it. Here's the thing. Once again, I'm not going to split too many hairs on this, but think about this. It will. It's got the BMS built in to do it. But it won't do it as efficiently as with a lithium algorithm, yeah? In terms of the amount of current that it'll deliver and whatnot. Yes, it will, but it'll only bring it up to about 95% charge on it. It'll still bring it up. It won't have the issues it's experienced like with the lead acid issue with your gel chargers versus your Agm chargers and all that. It won't charge it as efficiently and as fast if you're using a lead acid, but yeah. I mean, I've sold them as a direct replacement on remote area irrigation gates that run on solar out in the western region that were originally using lead acid with the same lead acid charge controller curve from the solar that's doing it. And yeah, most certainly you can do it that way. Look, personally, if I'm going to spend $1,500, $2,000, whatever on a battery, I'd probably buy a lithium charge. It's not too much to ask if you're going to spend a couple of $100 or even that on a lithium charger to do it a bit of justice, to complement it. But yeah, hey, lead acid charger, not a problem. The BMS in all of these units, we've got about 13 different sizes ranging from 9 ampere hour up to 12 volt, 300 ampere hour. They've all got the BMS built in to cater to this. But here's the thing. In terms of the boost voltage, with the way the BMS is to dictate the charging of the batteries, it's 14.6 volts on boost, plus or minus 0.1 of a volt. It can be a bit less, but once again, your efficiency comes into it. 14.6 in terms of float, because of the density of lead acid. Look, if you can float a lead acid indefinitely with very low current, because it will consume it. It will act as a load of sorts. With lithium, once it's charged in a lithium charger, goes open, that's it, it's charged. It won't consume any more than it requires, you know. The BMS will take care of it for the most part, but with a lithium battery, it's not the kind of thing that you just walk away and forget about like you do with a lead acid because with a lithium charger, it'll sense that, okay, it's consumed all the power, boom, open circuit. With a lead acid charger, it'll just sit there and keep applying the voltage. Now, it won't kill it or anything like that, but it'll certainly give the BMS a working over because it's always having to cater to isolating. Yeah? For my money, hey, you know what? Solar's a good one when you've got a pre-existing lead acid charge curve. Because you know what? When the sun goes down, you know, we're no longer charging. It's not an issue anymore. You know, we isolate. Not a problem. Anyway, is there any more? Have I cleared that up as, you know, yeah, we're absorbing this reasonably well? It's a hard thing to put your finger on, but when you talk about issues with resistance and power consumption, is a very important factor. It's why these things are used for electric cars. It's why our mobile phones went from nickel metal hydride to lithium. The minute it was implemented, any phone manufacturer that's stuck with nickel metal, you may as well, you know, you may as well be Kodak, you know. Not very nice, but it happens, you know.
Quick question.
Yeah.
In the building industry, people use battery operated tools.
Yes.
And they say, look, you should discharge the battery to dead flat and then charge it rather than half charge. Is that relevant to?
Not relevant to this. No, it doesn't matter. You're talking about the memory effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in power tools, there was two different chemistries. There was nickel cadmium and there was nickel metal hydride. One of them did have a memory effect, one of them didn't. People would always get it messed up and it was a headache. In this, it's not relevant there. You see, here's another thing about lithium. If I've got a lead acid charger, I only half charge it and I leave it sit there and it sits for about 12 months. Because it's only half charged and the plates haven't been stimulated enough, yeah, it'll sulfate if it's only half charged, yeah? And if you come back, you know, a classic one is a grey nomad, he's got a battery in his caravan, he ran his lights and all that and cleaned out the caravan, the thing was half flat. He went off and he came back next year and he was ready to go again. He thought, oh, I'll hook up and I'll charge it. He put his charger on and the thing blew out because of sulfation on the plate. There was all this resistance, right? You're never going to get that with lithium because it's like a mobile phone. Just because it's half charged doesn't mean that there's going to be no degradation in the lithium. You're going to be able to bring it up again just like it was new, yeah? The self-discharge might be an issue, but it's going to take a long time before it gets to a level where, you know, it's going to be a problem. And even then, you're just going to be able to charge it up. There's going to be no degradation no matter how long you really leave it flat for, you know. And it's going to be lighter, as you all know. Look, as I was showing you before, we're talking about discharge curves, yeah? I don't want to get too graphy with this because, frankly, I think you'll fall asleep. But, you know, if we look at a comparison here, 12 volts after 4 hours, you know, a drop below 12 after 4 hours, but the same load by comparison, yeah, 1.5 hours. And you can see that, you know, once again, it's all about efficiency. It's a hell of a lot better runtime that you're going to get out of lithium. And you've got to take into account too, though, this is the difficult thing. This is one of the shortcomings of lithium, sorta. And here it is. As it says down here, be careful. Once the battery starts to slow, it'll run out of juice very quickly. Now, as I said, it'll hold that constant voltage until it's got 7% left in the tank, and then bang, you won't get a warning. Well, with lead acid, you sort of will, because that voltage, you'll see the voltage decreasing. But with lithium, you sort of won't. But, you know, we do have a conclusion to that. Oh, what's more, yeah, as I said, I won't graze over this too much, but yeah, you've really only got 50% of available, you know, capacity on a lead acid. It's 100 or 97%, I should say, with a lithium. But what I really did want to show you, is this. Now, as I said, monitoring lithium is a real pain. But it can be done by means of having, once again, built into the BMS, a system which calculates how much is being consumed from the battery, wattage-wise, volts and amps, and power-wise. Monitoring how much is being pulled out of the battery, and when it's being charged, how much is being consumed by the battery. Rather than basing it on an open circuit voltage, which is a bit airy-fairy if the battery's degraded over time anyway. Just because it says the voltage is good, you hook up a load and it can roll off, it can only be surface voltage. But with lithium, the means of monitoring is measuring what goes out, what comes in, what goes out, what comes in. And funnily enough, look, there are devices that will do this externally. In this instance, we've got it built into the BMS. It's not with all of them. Maybe a third of the models have this feature, which is a Bluetooth monitoring device. And a few other little bells and whistles, yeah? So, look, what I'll do is, I'd rather just show you firsthand. So what I've got here, I don't know if you're all, probably not, but what this is, for want of a better term, a load bank. This simulates power being consumed from a product. In this instance, it's a 12 volt nominal device, consumes between, I think it's 18 to 20 amps. It's hard to get something exact when it's sort of like a resistive load, but 18 to 20 amps, and I'll let the device speak for itself. So what I'm doing here is I'm hooking it up. It could be an electric motor, it could be lighting source, it could be whatever, but I'll just get my phone and I'll show you. So, as I said, this monitoring is Bluetooth. Once you've downloaded an app, it's got a range of 10 meters with which to monitor it. And look, I'll let the unit speak for itself. And I've got it displayed up here, but showing you it in actual functionality is probably the best. And I don't know how good your eyes are, so squint or grab your glasses. But I'm just going into it now. Hang on, I'll go back to the start. Okay, so once we get into our first page, which I'm sort of on now, it goes launch and it'll sense whatever other batteries you've got in the room. Each one has its own independent code, so it can register. You can name each battery. With caravanning people, they'll say battery 1, battery 2, or with film and television that I've sold it into as well, like Panavision and people like that. They'll have lighting rig 1, lighting rig, name your batteries. In this instance, there's 2 batteries in the room, one there, one there. So we're going to go for that one because that's the demo load. So I know it's this one here. So what does it tell me? It brings it up. It tells me a bit of information. It says 13.3 volts. It's telling me it's 20.2 ampere hour. The capacity is at 78% at the moment. This little thing here says standby. There's no load, there's no charge. And the health, look, he's looking pretty mediocre. When it's 100% it goes green, he's got a nice smile. Kitschy feature, I know, but my wife likes it. Okay, what else is it telling us? As it's displayed here, pretty self-explanatory. Your ambient temperature, interesting up here. Once again, your voltage and how much you've got left. This is rather interesting, which I'll demo now. I'll just kick it and we're going to consume a 20 amp load. I'll go back to the start. What used to say standby is now saying discharge. It gives me the percentage of how much I've got left in the tank, but as it starts to consume power, that'll drop down, drop down, drop down, drop down, drop down. Now with an indicator like that, I've got plenty of notice and plenty of indicator how much I've got left in the tank. If there's going to be a problem coming up, whether it's the golf course or whether it's, I don't know, rushing somebody into surgery on a trolley or something, for whatever reason. Moving right along, this indicator here in terms of amps, it tells me how much current's being consumed from it. In this instance, it's 19.6 amps in a minus symbol. Respectively, if I hook a charger up to it, there's no minus symbol, it tells me how many amps are being consumed by the battery. Yeah? And as I said before, some of the additional features on the BMS that, rather than attempt to make you see that, pretty much says it here. You've got all these indicators here. You've got overcharge, cover its backside in case you've hooked up a lead acid charger or an automotive charger that hits it with 15.5 volts. Boom, game over. That'll go red. and it'll go red until, you know, such as a time it'll re-engage after a period of time, a number of minutes. Another one, you've got over discharge. If it drains the power down too low, it'll disengage to protect the battery. You've got temperature. You know what? These will perform really well and more efficiently in higher temperatures, but once I think it's 65 degrees Celsius, it is lithium. It is a volatile chemistry to a point, but once it gets to 65 degrees Celsius, open circuit there. And then we've got overcurrent, too many amps into it. Okay, this thing here, this will charge at 20 amps, but if I've got 40 and it gets too thirsty for its own good, boom, it'll say game over there as well. Which is a really good feature to have. Look, yeah, considering the amount you're going to spend on a lithium, there are other means of monitoring it. You can get this concept of measuring what's going in and what's coming out. Yes, you can buy devices that'll monitor it externally, but you're going to pay more for that. And there's going to be a lot more stuffing around to mount it and get everything going. Why not just have it built in and cover the... That's just my pound of flesh. Yes?
Is the app just a mobile phone app, or does it come as a desktop app or something that you...
It is a mobile phone app. You know, iTunes or whatever. Android phones as well. In the beginning, iPhone was great. We had a few teething issues with Android. We got all that ironed out. But you know, you go to any caravan park now, they're all sitting around with, you know, their tablets or their iPhones and all that. And you know, another thing I think of is, anybody here got a caravan? Any of yous? You got nice light displays and all that? You know, but you've seen them, haven't you? And these people, they spend $500 and they've got these amazing, oh, it's red, oh, it's amber, oh, it's green, oh, it's got the voltage. It's a bit airy-fairy because the voltage is not always a reflection of the condition of the battery. And they spend $500 on it. Well, forget about it. It's right here. It's all very well and good to think that you're in the bloody Starship Enterprise. It's all very entertaining. But let's look at the practicality of it. Why would you? This sort of alleviates that. And, you know, in an RV, who hasn't got a bracket on the dash where they can just mount it and you know, you don't need this cockpit. But then again, you know what? People love bells and whistles. And who am I to dictate, you know? I mean, it's served a lot of people in the industry very well for a long time. Yeah, but as I say, you know, people look, oh God, you know, it's $150 more to buy the one that's got the you know, your BMS with your Bluetooth monitoring. Yeah, but how are you going to know how much is left in the tank? One, and sooner or later you're going to go and, you know, you're going to want to buy something that's going to be able to measure it, or you're going to, you know, for peace of mind. You know, I think it's a no-brainer. And look, finally, as I was speaking earlier on about the applications, lithium is most oriented to cyclic applications. Although, for standby network power apps, it's pretty good too, because one, in the event of a mains fail and it drains the batteries down, when the mains comes back, it'll recharge heaps quicker. Yeah. Ambient temperature in battery rooms and big UPSs and network power and substations and all this kind of thing, they've got to have air conditioning because the lead doesn't like it when it's over 25 degrees Celsius. Not a problem with lithium, so you don't have to spend money on air conditioning and temperature control. It's more efficient there. There's a few other pluses to the story, but the upfront cost of it is so high at the moment, you may as well, you know, opt for the lead acid. Until the price, I would say, comes down by about 40%, you're not really going to see much movement in network power applications with lithium, although it is out there and there are top-end installations and data centres which are engaging with it at the moment. But watch that space. I can't see it really taking off for a while yet for that application. But, which brings me to my final bit here, these are some of the applications in terms of cyclic. Now, I think I mentioned before about the remote area irrigation gates. You know, well, there's one such unit there that's out in Western Victoria. They were originally using lead acid. They had a guy that used to get into a truck because they weren't charging efficiently and only getting so much out of the solar, and they had a guy that went out in the truck, and every 3 weeks he'd get a bunch of new charged lead acids, get the other ones out, put them in the truck, take them back, charge them over and over and over again. It's not really standalone power and autonomy. You can't say it's autonomous when you're having to do that every 3 weeks. So they replaced them with lithium, problem solved. The obvious application I spoke about before, this is another one of my customers. This is Vista RV Crossover in Bayswater. They've got these off-road campers that can do the Canning stock route and ride on the moon. Now, in this instance, they wanted to use two lithiums in parallel. They wanted to maintain the same voltage as I said before. So they've got two 125 ampere hour lithiums wired in parallel to give us 250 ampere hour, which is more like 300 or 350 ampere hour compared with lead acid. And they've put them in the back of the unit here. And as I said, a very, very common cyclic application. And I think one of the things that I've said to some of the nomad fraternity who were of a certain age, they say, oh, you know, how long will it last? And one of my customers says to me, well, it's going to outlast you. You know, and considering the vintage of a lot of these people with the caravans, there's every chance of it, because 2,000 cycles, you're only going to have so many days on the road at such a level of discharge. And then look, finally, this was a real win for us. This is, are you all familiar with Catch of the Day, or Catch, the website, where you can buy everything from shoes to booze at really good prices, online shop? Well, this is the warehouse of the future, so they say. This has been around for about 3 or 4 years. This is a Catch warehouse, I think it's the Western Suburbs. These are all bins with stock in it, and these are robots which have an XY sort of axis. Yep. And they pick the goods out of the bins and everything like that. Originally they were spec'd with lead acid. This company that do it, they're called Swiss Log engineering company. They originally had lead acids in these, 2 of them in series, 24 volt. And they, part of the condition was that these units, they're 50,000 bucks a pop, they got 70 of them. They've got a 3-year warranty. When you replace the batteries, you have to use their batteries, you have to buy it from them. They're lead acid, they're not efficient, they gouge you like all hell, but after 3 years, the warranty is finished on the whole lot, you can put in whatever you want. They came to us, said we want a conclusion, it runs on 24 volts, so what did we do? As I said before, you're not limited to your voltage when it comes to lithium. You've got all of these cells, they're 3.2 volts a pop in series parallel configuration. You can have one battery that's 24 volt. You can have it 50, whatever. The BMS will address everything else. So what we've got here is a 24 volt, 150 ampere hour lithium ion phosphate with your monitoring, yeah? And they put it in there. It's a fraction of the weight, it recharges faster, the power to weight ratio, as I said, is more favourable, it consumes less energy, runs for longer because the capacity is incredibly high. And there was one hoop we had to jump through though to get this, which, well, in hindsight it was really worth it, but the upfront cost was considerable at the time, and that is this, an IEC certification. They wouldn't insure the site without it. So we thought, oh well, we've got a whole bunch of them all tested and everything like that to confirm that certification. They test on short circuit, they test on heat, they test on a whole bunch of things, you know, to ensure that the product is sound and safe. And so that the insurance company will get on board, they can get more bang for their buck, we can get our sale, and everyone hopefully lives happily ever after. But that's actually, there's one of those on display down at the exhibition buildings at the moment. There's a logistics show on there called CMAT. I was there the day before yesterday, and they've actually got one of those on display, and I went to go and see it in the flesh. Although when I told them that we were the guy that put the lithium batteries into the catch of the day, they weren't too pleased with it because, well, we've sort of superseded their product with one of our own. It kind of, in a way, I think it sort of shows them up. It's like, what are you charging, 50 grand a pop for each one of these, and you've got lead acid in it? Okay, admittedly, they're a few grand, or 4 grand or something like that for each one of these batteries, but for the length of time that you're going to get out of it, and for what they were being gouged for these lead acids, it was a no-brainer. The numbers stacked up in the end. Just like I said, yes, the upfront cost is considerable, but the long-term cost benefits speak for themselves. And you know what? That's about as much as I can roll on with now without going dry. But are there any questions at all?
I don't know if you touched on it, but with the app, say you had a couple of batteries that were Lithium,
Yep.
and you ran them in series or parallel. Does the app accommodate for that, or does it
No, each battery has its own independent entity. That one, this one here, yeah. These guys at Vista RV, when they've got them matched up, they've got battery 1, battery 2. Or what they actually do is they name them. They put the serial number of the van that they manufactured, so that you can relate the battery to the specific van, so that there's no funny business. And it's battery 1, battery 2. Oh, look out, battery 1. Oh, that's going good. Oh, battery 2. Oh, what's going on there? Oh, what do you know? A rat has chewed its way through them. Whatever. You know what I mean? You can keep your eye on the condition of both batteries, but yeah, they recognise each one as its own entity. Each BMS is related to the specific cells that it combines, and that's it. But look, we can do customised jobs as well, where you could have one BMS, you could do 24, well, here's an example here, this 24 volt. I mean, to otherwise achieve that, you could get 2 of them and put them in series, but then you got you got 2. Well, yeah, exactly. Whereas if this, there it is, it's sort of all rolled into one. Yeah. Mm.
Can you set alerts with the app?
Set alerts with the app?
Yeah, like if it's discharging at a certain rate.
What, like audible alarms and stuff like that? Yes, you can. It's something that we're toying with the idea with at the moment. At the moment, we've only got that light display that shows you like a colour thing. Oh, you've got a short circuit. That's why there's no, that's why it's, you know, you've over discharged. That's why you're getting no power and all that. Yes, and you know what? That question I've had probably 100 times in the last 2 years. And it's very relevant because you'd like to have an audible alarm or something that triggers something that says, "Ooh, geez, what's going on?" You know, look out, we've got a dead short on the battery. Let's go and address that. Yeah, we're also looking. We're toying with the idea of introducing Wi-Fi for it. Yeah, in the same principle as instead of Bluetooth as a means of communication, if we have Wi-Fi, and we sort of toyed around with that. And look, we're just getting creative at the moment. But one. It's interesting. Here's an application that you probably want to think of. There was a guy I met, a biomedical engineer in one of the hospitals, and they've got all of these trolleys and everything, food trolleys, wheelchairs, all that sort of thing. What they want to do is they want a centralised point of referencing and labelling every battery in every one of these units. It's, you know, trolleys, and how all the batteries go, oh, look out, this one here is going to be dead in 2 hours if you don't give it a charge. Hey, this one wasn't charged overnight. What's going on here? Now with Bluetooth, you've only got a range of 10 metres, which in a hospital is pretty pointless unless you're going to walk around with your phone going, aha, there it is. You know, but with Wi-Fi, you've got a pre-existing network, and you can have it all in one, and you can label each one of the batteries. Oh, this is food trolley cart 1, boom. Oh, look out, that needs a charge. Oh, this one's ready to go, you know. You know, we've been doing this, a couple of years we've had this going for now, and we're still coming up with ideas. Or we're still trying to work out, or you know, we're trying to work out new headaches. Either way, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. I can see, but Bluetooth's pretty. And you mentioned wheelchairs being used.
Yep.
Bluetooth, you're always within range. So I mean, it'd be good to get a notification.
Yeah,
They were having something.
very much so. I think, you know, an audible alarm or a text message, and look, it is doable. We've just got to knuckle down and develop a bit more. What we've got so far has served us pretty well, especially, look, another application that I had was a mob. There's a mob called Lemac Films. I know you're familiar with Panavision? You know, they lease equipment to the film and television industry, and they've got these things where they put these batteries inside a Pelican case, you know, like what you got up here, and then they put a 3-pin Canon socket on it, and you know, they might be running a lighting boom or a microphone or a remote area or whatever, you know. And it's like, oh, okay, well, you better make this the last take because we've got 12% left in the gun, and you know, well, otherwise we're back tomorrow. You know exactly how much you've got to play with, and that's an advantage over lead acid that is incomparable. Yeah.
Well, the other big application coming up is solar panels and
yeah, storage.
House.
Yeah, like the Powerwall and the LG Chem and all this. Yeah, it is.
The solar panels put out 37 volts, so what sort of battery storage are they putting on that, is it?
Well, okay, this is interesting. It's all lithium iron phosphate, by the way. Same chemistry as what we're talking about here. Yeah? The thing is, right, when it comes to lead acid, it'll only chew so much. With lithium ion, you can have the biggest oversized solar array for a lead acid, put a lithium in there, It'll suck every bit that it's got to go and it'll do it faster and more efficiently. Your panels are 37 volts, whatever, open circuit, but you've got to think the means of charging, how it converts it is via a thing called maximum power point tracker, in that they're all in series and you've got a very high DC voltage, yeah? And then due to the amount of solar radiation, that DC voltage fluctuates, but it picks an average point with which to consume the amount of power that it's got to give. The old caravan, solar panels on the top of your caravans, they worked on a principle called pulse width modulation, which just kept the nominal voltage of your panel had to match your battery. And it was 70% efficient. With maximum power point trackers, it's 93% efficient because it picks a median point on a higher voltage and it charges it like that. They recover a hell of a lot quicker. You know, they'll take every bit that you've got to give off the roof in terms of storage, and that's an advantage over lead acid in solar. Take into account though, there's a lot of pie in the sky with energy storage in terms of solar. I've been in solar for 8 years, not in this particular company, but in the previous one. There's a lot of misconceptions with it, and if you think that stored lithium iron phosphate is going to be the answer to all your problems and it's this silver bullet, it's not. It's going to help, but it's not the answer just yet. We've probably got 20 years of evolution to make it worth it. Because, you know, you think of data centres, there's a hell of a lot of power, more than we can put onto the grid to sustain at the moment. And you've got to think too, you know, even if we all had a battery in our home and we can all live, you know, you've got restaurants, you've got emergency services, you've got all of this. And if we all think we can have a battery in our homes and, oh, guess what? Oh, stick it up the grid, I don't need them anymore. And well, guess what? All these poles and wires out here have got to be there for infrastructure, for, you know, to keep the lights on the street. You're damn right. And you know what? It requires a lot of maintenance. And you can say the power companies are thieves and are only going to line their pockets, but you know what? Come hell or high water, yeah? They're going to keep the lights on out there. Yeah. And if you think you can just pull off the grid, well, they're going to find a way they're going to get their pound of flesh, because something's got to pay for this, you know? And if we all think that we can all just have a battery and we can all just no, it's not going to happen. There's got to be, you know, they call me a bloody socialist for saying this, but we should never privatise our utilities like that. Because, you know, at the moment it's just a war between private enterprise and stored power, you know. We're all trying to stick it up the other. There's two warring parties. Yeah? If it was like the old SEC, you know, a government can, you know, we could work in conjunction with each other to find a happy medium. It's not this bloody price war. Who's going to save money? Who's going to make money? But, oh, geez, if I keep talking like that, I'm bloody pinko or something, you know. I'm just thinking rationally about it, you know.
So yes. What sort of voltages do you do house supplies at the moment? Well,
no, look, you can, but yeah, it's pretty involved.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, you've got to get a lot of, you've got to have an inverter that's got a compatibility approval with the battery from both manufacturers. They've got to get in bed together. And then the insurance companies have got to, you know what I mean? There's a lot of regulations involved with it, and that's why the companies that are really doing it, okay, Tesla and Elon and all that, okay, it's the obvious, but you've got people like LG that have got a solution that's making it happen. Okay, they've got enough backing to, you know, come up with a conclusion and to partner up with a bi-directional inverter manufacturer, so that the two of them, you know, they'll certify each other and work together. There's a lot involved to achieve that. But hey, you know, you can achieve that sort of system if you want to go about it your own way and do it all separate, or there's a lot of horror stories out there too, a lot of fires from people that think they can just pull it off of their own accord. That's why it's so strictly regulated. Yeah. Sorry, mate.
What's the smallest battery that the lithium come in?
12 volt 9, same size as the standard 12 volt 7 ampere hour. Yeah, the little, yeah. Electric Gates was one. Was it a security exhibition down at the XM? I've spent 2 days down there this week and I'm over it, just quickly, but guy there, 24 volt gates, you know, and they can open 15 times a day, and they want something that's going to be better for it. Bring on lithium. The capacity's higher, no loss of efficiency, no degradation in performance. Yeah, there's any number of applications that you can spec it into. But yeah, the 2 9s is what I spec'd up for that one. So I'm going to give him a couple of samples. They're probably, they're pretty expensive, so I sure hope he gets on board. So, but yeah, this 9, and the biggest one we've got is this one here. This is 24 volt 150, or with a bit of fiddling, if you think about it, series parallel wiring, a bit of fiddling with everything there, you can go 12 volt 300. Right, I'm going to take a breath.
Well done.
Thanks.
But yeah.